righty, here's the deal. Here's the deal, rather. Wow, mouth doesn't work today. Paul Doroshenko, lawyer in private practice. Jodie Emery, nice to have you here. Lee checks that always. 911 is a joke, apparently, to some people. Reminds me of a Public Enemy song, if anyone wants to go down that route. But can you believe some of these people?
Well, I mean, if they don't know who else to call, then call in emergency services.
But it's emergency services. An officer to put your kids to bed. Yeah. Like, some of this stuff is basic. Someone stole you can't get your remote away from your brother. Not appropriate.
From your child. I think it was they couldn't get the remote away from their child.
There's an even bigger issue there.
Do we have a list of them somewhere that we can put up for everyone to see? Because we should actually have a look at them before we chat them. Here we go.
Missed the newspaper, okay? Missed it. Maybe it was a theft.
The date's contact info to confirm plans. Like, let's be honest, that's ingenious. That's, you're really thinking outside the box there.
Well, okay, so there's some not very intelligent people in BC, and I guess this is, demonstrated this for everybody. But really, to me, this opens up an opportunity. I mean, if you were a businessman, or even if you were the government, you could be saying now, hey, what we really need in this province is a concierge for everybody. You should just be able to phone some number.
It's called 311.
Hey,
we have that.
Yeah, I know, but it's called working in the newsroom. You wouldn't believe the calls we get here about information.
Create a service and charge people $2 a minute, and they can call and ask and have anything done. I mean, this is an opportunity for a businessman, a smart business person, to get out there and create a new service for British Columbians. So they don't have to call 911 the next time they want to rent a fire truck.
Well, I wonder, this is kind of a year-end story, just finding something a bit funny, but is it really a crisis? Have these phone calls that are really pointless gotten in the way of actual emergencies being attended to? So, I mean, it's kind of good for a few giggles, but I'm not sure if it's really a crisis that people are calling.
Well, I think the important thing here is that they picked out 10 calls that were just absurd to demonstrate the pattern and what they get. And they probably get thousands of dumb phone calls.
I think ECOM is certainly getting more calls that don't belong on the 911 system.
And they said a lot of pocket dials and those sorts of things, which are tying up.
Hey, I have butt dialed 911 a few times, right?
You?
So yeah, of course, and they're really good about it, right?
And the next question is, should there be a fine?
No, not for that.
Yeah, well, I'm starting to wonder.
Well, no, and they stay on the phone with you, are you okay? Are you in any sort
Well, that's the thing. They don't know whether or not you pocket dialed or if you're assaulting somebody who just tried to dial 911.
And that is a problem when they do get a call and it's a hang-up. Oops, I didn't mean to call 911. They might have to come out and investigate. That does take time. And
if they have a hang-up and it's a call from a landline, they'll go to your house.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah. And speaking of fines, the backcountry ski story, which we talked about a few segments ago, should people who go under the rope break the rules, shall we say, be fined for it?
I don't know if they should be fined for it, but I think the cost of extricating them certainly should be borne by the person who puts themselves in that situation. If you go up into the backcountry, if I go fishing and my truck breaks down way up on the mountain, does the government come and pay for my tow back to the city? No, I have to get a tow truck and somebody to come and bring my vehicle back. If you go into the backcountry, somewhere out of bounds and you have to be rescued, why should I have to pay for somebody else who was irresponsible?
Well, taxpayers pay for a lot of people's irresponsible behaviors. And I don't know, I read an article about this saying that should we fine people, and the answer from the rescuers themselves was no, because if you charge someone for their rescue, the family might decide, listen, let's just get some friends together and go hike up there and look for them. Well, now you've got 15 people lost in the wilderness that need rescuing. So that putting a cost on being rescued might prevent people from calling for help when they need it. And I don't know how often this happens. I was just at Sun Peaks. I heard there were a few skiers lost there. But again, is that an enormous cost? That's too much for society to bear?
There's also the cost of putting the rescuers in danger as well. And sometimes when people have done something stupid and gone where they shouldn't have in an avalanche area, you're putting those lives at risk as well. And you have to be able to put some sort of consequence on that action. And we were talking earlier, and I think the rescuers don't want that. They don't want fines, but maybe there should be a packet when you are rescued. Thanks, here's some safety tips for next time, and here's a wish list of things that we would like. Here's where you can make a donation. here's approximately what using a helicopter for an hour costs. Please make a donation at your own expense and make it more of an expectation that you will exactly,
I like it. I like it a lot.
exactly, an expectation for rescuers.
Or you could sell insurance packages with ski
If your
tickets.
family member's lost, I don't think you're concerned about the disincentive aspect of, you know, should we call the authorities? You call the authorities. And if you get a bill later on because you behaved stupidly and got lost, well, I mean, I think, you know, it shouldn't be an unreasonable amount of money, but I think people should expect to have to pay for the cost of taking care of themselves. And if they put themselves in a risky situation, why should they not bear the cost? Aside from the potential disincentive, which I don't think would actually play out.
I don't know.
Is that the last word?
I don't know. I don't know. If I was in a spot and I thought that I'd have to pay, I might try to get myself out.
Or you'd wait a few more hours
sure.
to try and get yourself out until it's a more dire situation, and then it's an even more emergency.
If your house is on fire, are you just not going to call the fire department, Aaron, because you're a little
No,
worried
but
that
if
you're
you're
gonna have to
lost,
pay
you might
for the...
wander another couple of hours.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to get the garden hose out here.
Well, there is a lot of conversation about that, actually, in the United States, private fire services and whether you should have to pay to have your house put out if it's on fire. So, I mean, there's a lot of argument about the harm done to society and who has to pay for what. But again, I think getting people from out of bounds in our beautiful province where they explore the mountains, it's not a huge cost, I don't think. I mean, I haven't seen the numbers.
I would expect my home insurance to pay for it. Whether it does or not, I don't know.
So
but I
maybe some
expect my home
skiers insurance then. We got to get some ski
Actually, you know what?
insurance.
That is actually something that the BC Search and Rescue Association is talking about. So it's certainly on the table. All right, the end of the year, we should probably talk about some of the top stories of the year. And I have a rule: we shall not talk about Rob Ford tonight. So the top stories of the year that do not involve Rob Ford nationally.
Canadian or national stories?
Let's talk nationals first. Rob Ford.
Short term or long term? Well, I mean, I think the flood in Alberta is probably the biggest story of the year, really. You know, you've got thousands of people who were, their houses were wiped out as a result of basically poor planning when they laid out.
Some are still out of their houses.
Lots of people still out of their houses. They weren't home for Christmas. Count on them. Anyway, yeah, that's probably the biggest story, I would think, you know, nationally, at least in my mind. Now, if you're thinking long term, there's other big stories. We've seen a huge shift in Western Canada to exporting oil and liquefied natural gas, and that's going to be something that plays out over the next 20 years. That's going to impact everybody who lives in Western Canada. And that really came this year.
The fact that you brought up the flooding, and I think it is a big story, but I think there's a big story most people missed out of that, was that the police used the opportunity to force people out of their homes and then go into their homes and search their homes and take their guns. Now, I don't like guns, I don't like war, I'm very anti-violence, but when the government goes and takes people's private property and went searching through closets, digging through belongings to find these guns, even though they weren't used in criminal activities, that's a very worrisome sign of what our government does to its own people. So that's something that came up.
It was a distressing side story in the
It was, thin excuse or thin grounds used to take those guns too.
Well, I mean, going into people's houses and digging around through things to look for them. I mean, we're not talking about ones that were sitting on the sofa. But even if it's sitting on the sofa, I mean, you poke your head in the door and you say, is there anybody in here? You got to clear out. I think that's probably all the police are allowed to do.
Right,
and going and wandering around in people's houses.
And worse.
But, you know, it's really, I mean, I'm a criminal lawyer and I see this. It's disturbing to me how often I see the police take our rights, view them very cavalierly. They
view them almost as a hindrance to what they want to do, it seems. It seems police start to see our rights as getting in the way of things.
Well, the government does that too.
Where do we put the Senate scandal?
Oh, I think that's huge. I really do. I think that was probably one of the biggest stories of the year because it showed to our country that even if Harper can do a lot of good things for business or whatever other people like him for, there's a serious problem when your government begins to lie to you and cover it up. Harper is definitely responsible, whether he had his hands involved or he was just picking the people who did the dirty work. There was dirty work done, and the Canadian public needs to know their government isn't trustworthy, and that came out of it.
I think people need to pay more attention to that story. You know, we followed it quite closely, but I would guess that if you were to walk down the street on any city in Canada, you would find people who didn't know about it, or the
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think
so.
It exposes so much hypocrisy in the Conservative Party. This is the party that held themselves out as purer than everybody else. They were the ones who were going to be ethical, and the appointees that Stephen Harper puts in are skimming from the taxpayers. And the government denies any responsibility or doesn't step up to the plate and apologize or anything for it. I mean, this is actually the type of thing that resonates with taxpayers, resonates with voters.
But I think you are right, though, because there's so many names that came up. I mean, if you didn't know who Nigel Wright was and you got lost, most of the public knew was Mike Duffy something or other.
And if you weren't following it on a day-to-day basis, I think it was easy to get lost in that story, and the daily developments and the implications. It's not done, but I think it's one of those ones that people should be paying close attention to.
A couple of things. Does Harper get reelected in 2015, and does anything happen to the Senate because of this?
Oh, I think it's too far down the road to call the election in 2015. I don't think the Conservatives are going to have quite as much ability to smear Justin Trudeau as they've been able to with other people in the past. It may not stick with him, but they certainly have a run for their money. You know, we'll have to wait and see. I don't know what other people think about that.
Control freaks don't like to lose control, so we'll see how long he holds on to it for.
I know. I mean, we need a province to step forward with a motion to abolish the Senate. I'm curious to see which.
Well, it's interesting. It almost looks like a setup to embarrass the Senate.
It does.
Because this was the Reform Party's line all along, was that they wanted to get rid of, abolish the Senate or have a Triple E Senate.
Oh, but we need a Senate. I really don't feel comfortable with the idea of legislation just being looked at once. It's not even looked at once for, but
I read the Hansard from BC, and I'm amazed how little debate they actually have about legislation. Lots of times it doesn't even seem that anybody looked at it. So I kind of like the idea of a Senate. I don't know that I like the idea of the Senate the way it is, but. Okay,
quickly, you've got about a minute left. Any other stories that caught your eye that we haven't talked about?
Edward Snowden. Don't trust the government.
Snowden's absolutely huge. I can't believe that he wasn't Time Magazine's Man of the Year. It's just ridiculous that he wasn't, because
the Pope was a good choice, but not Edward Snowden's choice.
The Pope's an interesting choice. Yeah. He's an interesting Pope. But, I mean, Snowden, the impact of this, exposing what's actually going on. And I have to tell you, I mean, it's going on in all sorts of different governments, we're finding out. It's not just the American government doing this, and it's not the American government spying on everybody outside of their country as well. I mean, it's really quite shocking, and it really raises, I mean, it almost feels like fiction. It feels like some sort of dystopian future where you find out that your government's... There's a bunch of them. But, it's just really very frightening. And I can't believe that he wasn't Time Magazine's Man of the Year.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Jodie Emery, Paul Doroshenko, Lee Checkstead, thank you very much. Happy New Year to you all. Are we doing enough to keep our kids safe when they are out playing hockey or skiing? One doctor says more could be done. The Pulse is next.